Hello once again, everyone. So this will be a relatively quick video. One of the things that has been highly requested of me is to talk about how to build a simple soldier's kit. Now I've done the affordable armor, redux, and you can build out of those pieces, but for this particular, for those looking either to, hey, I have no interest in actually doing a nightly setup, period, or hey, I want this as a stepping stone, but I still want to look like a foot soldier, or even, hey, I want to do more armor-leaning things next year at Yeehaw, what would be the best that I could build? So I'm doing this video using that. So a lot of this won't necessarily be new information, but I will get a couple more details on the things as well. And below, in the description, is a Google document where I've also written out essentially what I'm talking about now, with more detail, some pictures as examples, and links to everything, and even some things that I don't have here. So, firstly, let's talk about the base pieces. Everything here is meant to go over your existing HEMA gear. So you have to start off with the baseline of, you could go to a longsword tournament and you'd pass gear check. The only modification you might make before you get into any of the steel is choosing to get an armor-specific gambeson. So this is a more expensive one. This is my combat jack from Steel Mastery. You could also get something cheaper, but just you decide to get something more dedicated. That'd be the only change you make. Beyond that, everything else is meant to be entirely directly over your stuff. So, firstly, torso. The most important part. This is really what sets you apart from being, unarmored to basically armored. You have two routes that you can go. You can go plate, or you can go mail. If you go plate, what you're looking for is something similar, right? These are the kind of main three types of breastplates that we play around with. There's some others in the Google Doc, but all it's going to be is it just slaps on top of your stuff. Doesn't really impede your motion all that much, very easy to wear. These come in a variety of off-the-shelf sizes, and most of them are mild steel, so it's not that hard for you to bend them, shape them a little bit if they're a little too wide, a little too flat, whatever. You can adjust that pretty easily. I highly recommend that if you are going to go this route, you pay attention to two very important things. Number one, if you're going to go for plate, go for just a solid, simple breastplate. Right? Something like 16 gauge is just fine. Get a solid, simple breastplate, and then when you're done with it, you can pass it on really easily. Either by, in my case, a lot of this just ended up as the armory for the school, but also just, it's a good thing to have around. If you go for something more complicated, especially because people are looking, oh, do I need a backplate, etc.? No, you don't. You want it as simple and non-restrictive as possible. All it is to cut off that middle line target, which is mostly where you're going to be getting struck at. Now, you could also go the brigandine route, but again, if you're layering this over your normal HEMA gear, that's already a lot bigger than you normally are. Brigs are more expensive than getting these. These are like maybe 130 a pop, and that's on the more expensive side, honestly. Brigs are gonna run closer to 300-400, so you're getting easier to put on protection, arguably, and historically more like what a soldier would wear, but it's not really worth it at this stage. So, eschew the brigs, go for the plate, nice and simple. Why would I then choose to go with mail instead of plate? It's about mobility and overall protection. So this plate, for example, I'm going to carry the smallest one. This one I actually wear all the time. It's just about my center mass. I don't care about my arms. I will have to defend those myself. I don't care about my legs. I will have to defend those myself. I don't care about my face. I will have to defend that myself. It's just so that if someone goes center mass for you, you have a better chance of staying alive. So that doesn't actually cover all that much. Now the good news is, since it doesn't cover all that much, it's also not necessarily that heavy and decently moves with you, but it does take some getting used to. Mail, on the other hand, heavier. So my mail shirt there is a medium and weighs about 22 pounds. The benefit though is it covers more of you. So now it's going, that's a half sleeve, so it covers all the way down to here and down to here on my arms. So now, yes, someone can puncture through that, whereas they couldn't get through the plate, but to do so is going to take a much, more dedicated than if you were just, normally as you are. And also I get the added benefit of, if someone is cutting at my arms, I don't have to worry about parrying that anymore. I could just let the mail take the shot. The other nice thing is that most people who wear mail for the first time compared to plate don't notice it as much if it's close enough to fitting and they are wearing it belted. So that's kind of the main benefit. But the biggest caution when it comes to mail that you need to be aware of is, it's on the pricier side, but it covers more. It's on the heavier side, bear that in mind, but it moves more, and it's greasy. If you want to care for this mail to make sure it actually lasts for a while, you need to come to terms with the fact that grease is going to get on everything, including whatever underlayer you're wearing. So if you have a nice jacket that you don't want to invest in an armor jacket, but you want to start doing some armor stuff, go with the plate purely for cosmetics, because this is going to destroy, eventually, whatever is underneath it. Now you could also make the choice to layer up with both of these. For the focus of this, where we're just going, hey, you want to be a decently armed foot soldier, you know, so to put into yeehaw terms, we're talking about 2s and 3s, right? You're fine with just one or the other. If, however, you wanted to go for something more like being a dedicated 2 or starting to even work your way up to being possibly a 2 bordering on 1, you'd layer both. The benefit of layering both, of course, is that now you're even more protected. The mail covers what the plate doesn't while not adding any more restriction in your mobility, and then the plate ensures that anyone who does try to get for those hard targets, you know, they got to get around that. That really does, that combo makes a lot more difference if you went played in one versus the other, and it will complement very well. Downside, you're in a lot more weight. The other thing to consider is armoring more or less of yourself on purpose, but we'll put a pin in that and get to the helmets. Now, helmets. You should get one. That's really the biggest thing. You can, of course, as we know, absolutely compete at yeehaw or do whatever, not in a helmet, but if you're going to in any way start fighting in, you know, one-on-ones or things along those lines, you need a helmet. And it's probably the more important piece. If we were talking pure historically, you get a helmet first above everything else. So what options are out there? Well, rule number 1, don't bother trying to go for anything close face. In this layer of armor, restricting your vision is entirely pointless. You want open face that you can see clearly and so that impacts you as little as possible. Again, all of this is designed to be relatively the same as your normal fencing kit, just now there's some steel pieces and it's a little heavier. So wearing, for example, this Burgonet with a perf plate face, basically the same as my fencing mask at this point. The visibility isn't impacted hardly at all. There's, of course, you know, a little bit of hearing loss, but that's not that big a deal. And considering how much it covers, that's a great trade-off. Same thing could also be true of, for example, this salette. So same idea, a lot of coverage, just the face is open. And this one also, you need to wear it with a padded hood, of course, and things along those lines. But that's more detail down below. Essentially, if you're gonna wear one of these, and there's a couple resources to get them, you're looking for things like SCA cut and thrust helms, what have you, stuff with perf plate in them, open face, usually a detachable visor, Alvin-tails, not Alvin-tails, doesn't really matter. But point is, most of them come without padding, so you're going to need to get your own padding. So you got the red hood in that salette. There's another example of a slightly thicker hood that you could put under it, or my father and I built the liner for my Burgonet. Now, another thing you can do, and you can also find these for sale, for example, there's a Morian helmet I've seen kicking around, is you could modify your own. So this is a kettle helmet off Colts Athena, and then we took a bever, made a perf plate mesh, riveted the mesh to the bever, and then the bever screws into the helmet. And again, you wear a little padded coif underneath so that you pad things out extra. This gives you even more protection now because they're having to target an even narrower strip versus just your pure open face. I will probably, in the future, go ahead and modify this visor to have a bever so it's a little bit safer. But the whole idea is that, yeah, your face is still wide open as far as target is concerned, but that's good for you because now you don't have to worry about most things hitting your head. Of course, axes can still kill you, but that's really not a big priority for you. It's the idea of anyone's cutting at you or just things are around you, you have no fear. You've got that nice solid skull cap protecting your nugget in even the worst presses. The only thing you have to worry about defending is a little space like this. And that's really not that hard to do. And this is where we get back into the whole armoring parts of yourself. So, the more armor you put on, the harder of a task you are giving your opponent. So for example, I wear my jack, I wear my breastplate, I wear a helmet with an open face. That still leaves, of course, my face is a target, my arms are a target, my abdomen and lower body are a target. Those are larger areas to defend, but on paper, that's not all that different than fencing if I didn't have my breastplate on, if I didn't have the helmet on. It's really about the same as you normally defend. Not that hard, just occasionally you don't need to parry this blow that was going toward your head, or you don't have to worry about the thrust that was going towards center mass. The reason this matters is because one of the stranger things that happens when you start playing with armor is you have to learn to not care about attacks going towards certain places. If I then go ahead and also put on, let's say I throw on that mail shirt, Now I'm making it even more difficult to go for certain targets. So why go for here, which is breastplate and mail and all that coverage, when you could only go for my hands? I throw on gaunts, now there's even less target, just a small sliver of forearm. This becomes a lot more evident. And if I were to put on a closed visor, then there's no point at going at my head at all. All your targeting now goes downward. And so as a fighter, what I'm essentially telling the opposite person to do is, hey, I've closed all this off. You can only hit me one spot, and if I'm ready to guard it, that's good. But especially in a melee, you're not always necessarily ready to guard it. And on one-on-ones, it can be even worse. Because I look at someone across the field and I see they're pretty much armored all the way waist up, I'm going to stab them in the dick. Because I know for a fact there won't be armor there. And that's the thing about being a foot soldier versus being, arming yourself really for like knightly combat is you need to protect the bare minimum. The places that will put you down dead. Your helmet, so your head, your center mass, and then that's really pretty good. Gaunts if you need them, but that's a good way of ensuring that most of the shots that would go for killing areas would not put you down. Now, of course, you can still take wounds other places. We're not perfectly simulating realism, but the idea being that you're mostly used to guarding those areas anyway. Who among us who have fenced have not been cut at the arms? You're very used to parrying those sorts of blows. And dealing with a small target that's a lot easier to move versus someone always being able to just flung thrust up the middle is a very, very different sort of fight. So if you are going to start putting on more pieces, if you're going to layer on top of this, you need to be doing so for a good reason. If you're going to be mostly standing out the back using a very long spear, there's not a lot of point in putting extra weight on your arms. You may want a helmet that has a lot more visibility and not bother putting anything on your arms, but if you're going to be more like a 2, or you want to work your way up more to being on the border or 1, then yeah, throw on that mail shirt and go ahead and throw on some arms to make sure you're a little safer. Now, addendum to that, let's talk about the arms real quick. So, in general, for a foot soldier, avoid complex arms at all costs. Reason being is that as far as layering them over your stuff, now that forces you to have to get something that's a support guard. So that would be fine because it has points attached to it, so I can, put the armor onto me, but that's mostly too complicated. It's just too much investment for not that much benefit. Articulate arms are, they're heavy, one piece. If they don't fit you well, they're harder to modify. Go for something floating. So a couple options. Of course, you can just get elbow cops and band braces, boom. I've got some recommendations in the doc below as well as the original doc. But another good thing, especially for a foot soldier, because they're light, is I highly recommend going for something like jack chains. So these I've talked about a little bit, but I really want to kind of give them their due because they were worn at Yeehaw and they did a great job. This is the arm protection of the soldier. All it is just a strip of metal that goes along the outside of your arm. So if someone cuts at it, it'll take it. A little bit of protection as well. I mean, this does cover a decent part of my shoulder. It's just a little bit more target protection. Now, this does require it to be pointed to something, so you do need it suspended somewhere, but that's actually not that hard to rig up. And then we have put it onto a leather arm guard, so that way you're actually still protected, but you could also modify any of your standard arm guards to be able to point this onto it, and it'd be just fine. So something along those lines, that's more modification required, like a kettle helmet, but the benefit is you get a decent amount of protection for very little investment. That's why rondels or vestiges exist. You could also do something along those lines. The more you move into wanting to be closer to the front of the action and worry less about getting hit, that's when you start dedicating weight to yourself. You are giving up mobility, you are giving up, essentially you're giving up the choice of, okay, opponents might target me anywhere, which can actually be an advantage. You're telling them exactly where you want them to hit you, and you are then prepared to defend those places. That is when you dedicate yourself to, nope, I'm going to give up some mobility, so that way I only have to worry about this place. And that's really the biggest difference between playing more or less armor. For most people, however, who just want to be a foot soldier, who just want to be a cog in the machine, and that's honestly not a bad way to go, don't worry about that. Mailer plate, something to cover your torso. Helmet, very good idea. Over your regular stuff, gaunts if you want them, you're good. But either way, down below is the document that goes into more detail, shows some things that I don't have here. I just want to kind of give a general brief overview so you can see some proportion with each other. And you can find a lot of other ideas as you start to look at this, like, oh, could I modify this piece to make it work for me, or oh, what should I want to do? So you can really kind of go wild with this. The biggest things, though, is always layer it, over your base gear, so that's the most familiar to you, and also so your standard of safety is always there. You know, if you, like those forearm guards, for example, great if you're in a synthetic melee. If you were doing steels, just leather may not be enough. So you may choose to wear the modern protection in place of. But either way, thank you very, very much for watching, and we'll go over some other harness builds another time.